I'm Francis Levy, co-director of the Philoctete Center. Hi, Jason. Welcome to Our Life in 6 Lyrical Poems. And those of you who have been to we've had 3 previous sessions of Our Life in 6 Lyrical Poems, have heard how Mike Braziller and I met each other over poetry. Mike Braziller is the president of Persea Books, which is a very prominent publisher of books of a literary nature, and especially books about poetry and books of poetry. And I'm very proud to introduce Mike tonight. Mike will introduce our guest.
Louise Gluck is the author of numerous books of poetry, most recently Averno, a finalist for the 2006 National Book Award. Her other works include The Seven Ages, Vita Nova, Meadowlands, The Wild Iris, Ararat, and The Triumph of Achilles. She is a Pulitzer Prize winner and recipient of the Poetry Society of America's William Carlos Williams Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award, among many others. She is writer in residence at Yale, and I welcome her, and I'm very proud and very glad that she's here with us tonight, and I know you are. Tonight, I'm going to begin with a few very few biographical facts about Oppen. And then Louise is going to read an essay, a very brief essay, a very important essay on, and then we will, as we always do, go through the poems. 1908, born George Oppenheimer in New Rochelle. His family was affluent, but his childhood was scarred by tragedy and family displacement. His mother shot and killed herself when Oppen was 4. The family moved to San Francisco, but he didn't get along with the stepmother. As a teenager, he attended a military academy and was driving a car, had an accident, somebody was killed, and he wound up leaving the school. And there was just 2 little things here. Traveling would certainly loom large in his life, and this is just one of these interesting facts. And then, nor was there anything that I know of or could find about poetry in his early upbringing. He met Mary Colby at Oregon State University in 1926. They spent a night together, and I think that's referred to in The Forms of Love, the final poem we'll be looking at. We have to read that poem.
Say that about everything. And we'll be here until 11 o'clock, and we won't eat dinner.
Well, we'll read very quickly. We'll read it very quickly. No. He got caught, and she was expelled. He got expended. So, and then the 2 started hitchhiking around. They got married when they were both 19. They were born the same year. I mean, the exact same age. They searched, and this is a quote, to escape from the trappings of class. He was very, very affluent and very political, became increasingly political. They met Charles Rezhnikoff and Louis Zukowski in New York City. They drove to the city, 19 or 20. They had all kinds of, apparently he was developing an interest in literature. He began his first book called Discrete Series at that time, from an inheritance, and he began a press called the Objectivist Press, which eventually published his first book. And the 2 during the Depression became increasingly aware of the increased disparity between the haves and the have-nots. In 1935, he organized for and joined the Communist Party in Brooklyn. They had a child. Linda was born. She has been in touch with me over this event, and we're very pleased to hear about it. And then he stopped writing for 25 years. The family moved to Detroit. He was very resourceful. He was a craftsman. He was a mechanic. He was a carpenter. And an organizer, and then joined the Army. He fought in the war. He received a Purple Heart. Returning, he moved out to the West Coast and built houses. And all this time he's not writing. He wrote 1 book in his teens, practically. He worked in Henry Wallace's presidential campaign in 1948. And then he moved to Mexico for 10 years during the McCarthy era and the House Committee of Un-American Activities. And I think he was going to be forced to either give names and turn people over or just to leave the country or go to jail. And he went to Mexico for 10 years. One little slightly amusing thing, and I'm really, he began to soften, I think, somewhat. His daughter attended Sarah Lawrence College, and he had some sort of a dream in which, he's close to 50 now, in which he would get rid of rust. He had a dream of getting, and he and his wife were in therapy in Mexico. And this dream was interpreted that he should get back to his writing. And he did. They came back to the United States, lived in Henry Street in Brooklyn, which I believe is near Bergen Street, if it's the same Bergen Street, and we're going to talk about that. That's the first part we're talking about. And then over the next 10 or 15 years, he wrote the materials, This in Which, Of Being Numerous, and won a Pulitzer Prize and became a very important and very prolific poet. Eventually, in '75, New Directions published his collected poems. He received many awards, the Pulitzer, the American Academy Institute of Arts and Letters, the NEA in Penn. And he died in 1984. And now, if that's just final point, I could quote from it, but Robert Creeley in his introduction said that the life somehow doesn't tell us what the poems do, and we're going to try to turn to the poems to find out more about him. Okay.
This is, can you hear?
Yeah, very easily.
Good. An essay from a book called Proofs and Theories. If you see it on a bookshelf, it won't look like this. This is the English edition. On George Oppen. Within the discipline of criticism, nothing is more difficult than praise. To speak of what you love, not admire, not know to be good, not find reasonably interesting, not feel briefly moved by or charmed by. To speak of such work is difficult because the natural correlatives of awe and reverence are not verbal. I have been for some time trying to speak on paper of the work of George Oppen with this overwhelming impediment, but tribute seems necessary, a way of affirming certain values. As a reader, consequently as a writer, I am partial to most forms of voluntary silence. I love what is implicit or present in outline, that which summons as opposed to imposes thought. I love white space, love the telling omission, love lacunae, and find oddly depressing that which seems to have left nothing out. Such poetry seems to love completion too much, and like a thoroughly cleaned room, it paralyzes activity. Or to use another figure, it lacks magnetism, the power to seem simultaneously whole and not final, the power to generate, not annul, energy. George Oppen is a master of white space, of restraint, juxtaposition, nuance. His art, though exquisite in detail and scrupulously precise, attains to scope and grandeur through what seems in some ways a mastery of perspective. And then there's a quote, "Ah, these are the poor, these are the poor." Bergen Street. There is something oriental in this. What is, to my limited understanding, less oriental is the momentum of the poems. Oppen has not got William's scampering vitality, but he seems William's celestial counterpart. A difference, it seems to me, is that Oppen's mind more craves abstraction, the gift for context, for perspective, being an example of this. Williams, at his least good, is stubbornly trivial. Oppen, at his least good, relentlessly lofty. He risks the tedium of the unrelievedly exalted. The self, in Oppen as in Williams, is a source of information. The individual life, frail, awkward, imperfect, is at every moment the vessel which contains the soul or mind, and it is about the mind in particular that Oppen speaks with greatest ardor, infusing mind with radiant spiritual properties. The virtue of the mind is that emotion which causes to see. Very odd, that sentence, that causes to see. There seems a deleted noun or pronoun in the absence of which to see explodes as the object of causes. The individual self is a location, its presence implicit. Only in a specific self can the virtue of mind produce a concrete result. Immediately the poem moves on. What would be in another poet solemn conclusion becomes in Oppen a development. There is a powerful sense in this poetry of that which is precious. What is precious to Oppen is usually singular, common, and small. Thus the concern not for language so much as words. Possible to use words, provided one treats them as enemies. Possible, that is, if one captures them one by one, proceeding carefully, they will restore, I hope, to meaning and to sense. How beautiful that last word, how typically direct and practical. This is Oppen's definition of substance and integrity. This particular ideal of service to language carries with it a high evaluation of communication, very different from the service done, say, by Stevens with his taste for rarities, his autoerotic sensuousness. Words restored according to Oppen's criteria to natural health and soundness make a language available for common use, not a hermetic patois. If meaning and sense seem insufficiently charged for poetry, so much the better. They remind us that precision is not the opposite of mystery. These are Olympian sentiments for all the prizing of simplicities. But the lines themselves are neither condescending nor didactic. The I here is the author of a prayer that seems remarkably poignant, as hope seems fragile among such solid nouns. There is nothing in Oppen of romantic swagger, of the diva, the I, David, will do this with my little slingshot. Moral passion usually manifests itself in decisiveness, which becomes a compulsion to take sides. But a mind either intensely religious or unusually open may invest such passion in acts of speculation. These poems speak a moral language, a language of salvation and contempt. They have the force of true passion, but none of the smarmy definitiveness, none of the self-righteousness. Their beauty has always seemed to me the beauty of logic, the virtue of the mind, whose end is vision. And then a quote, "We walked to where it would have wet our feet had it been water." That's so beautiful. You have that poem. You have many of these poems.
Yeah, she quoted from the first, at least the first one that we're going to read now, and the last one. Do you want to pick? Would you like to read this?
Sure.
Here, right.
You know, I'll read it from my book.
Okay.
There's my little yellow marks. We're going to do street first. Street. Do you all have it? Street. These are the poor, these are the poor. Bergen Street. Humiliation, hardship. Nor are they very good to each other. It is not that. I want an end of poverty as much as anyone, for the sake of intelligence, the conquest of existence, it has been said, and is true. And this is real pain, moreover. It is terrible to see the children, the righteous little girls, so good. They expect to be so good. You want me to start?
If you'd like to,
If you'd like to. That's like my mother used to say, "Darling, would you like to set the table?" And I would say, "No." She would modify it to set the table. I think it would be interesting just to walk through the poem. One of the things that is so remarkable in this poetry, and I don't really know a poet who achieves this so regularly or has this exact ambition. Oppen has a way of replicating on the page the impression of a mind engaged in debate with itself. And the white space, it's a visual white space, but it's also a disjunction, stanza to stanza, sometimes line to line, juxtapositions that don't seem orderly or narrative. One of the ways you learn to read these poems is to narrate for yourself that which has been left out. And the poems represent a kind of, it seems to me like what you do in analysis too. You listen for what isn't there, and the tones here, the manner in which a line is spoken. I'm not a great reader of this work, but you can hear it on the page. It's unmistakable.
Yeah, I agree strongly with the very first thing you say. I think, coming to it for the first time, the non-inflated quality of the diction is one of the most noticeable things. He dispenses. There's a word I kept writing. I'm thinking about wanders. Now you said something like that, but it almost, you said it follows the thinking of the mind. It's very spare. There are no necessarily internal explanations of why it moves from one to the other, but it does convey a struggle too.
And dispute, an inward debate, a kind of self-querying goes on throughout the poem, it seems to me. Begins, these are the poor, these are the poor. Something being pointed to, these, not us, these. So distance is established between the one who beholds and that which he beholds. And they're a kind of spectacle, a scientific example, an object of scrutiny, but not quite human. They're a group. They're a kind. These are the poor. These are the poor. and then white, and then Bergen Street, like an appositive, a label. These are the poor, these are the poor. As though the words Bergen Street, the name of the street, contained all the information we already had. You say Bergen Street, you know everything, like a code for a whole way of life. And then that life is elaborated. Humiliation, hardship, ellipsis, as though the list goes on, it could go on indefinitely. Nor are they very good to each other. It is not that. They're
well, there's an example of what you're talking about. After the word hardship, he begins to so there was something in between there. He's almost arguing with himself.
Yeah.
Or he had a thought, and he's responding to that. He doesn't tell us what. Yeah. Okay.
So the nor is the negation of something that is affirmed in the white space.
Right.
Ah, the platitude. And yet. This is, or there may be other readings of this, but one way to read it is, but they're so, look at how they have such social connectedness one to the other here, then a sense of bond, a sense of community, and the poem said, no. And then a kind of rehearsal of a certain position. I want an end of poverty as much as anyone. Don't mistake me. Don't think that what I say out of a kind of disdain for or insensitivity to their dilemma. I want an end to poverty, an end of poverty as much as anyone, for the sake of intelligence, the conquest of existence, it has been said, and is true, so that these large rhetorical ideas that attach to the end of poverty, these claims that are made in rotund language, it is also true. These things that are so oracular, they are true. One wants an end to such things. And here is where the poem, it seems to me, for all the marvelousness of what has gone before, here is where the poem is made in these last two stanzas. And this is real pain, moreover. It is terrible to see the children, the righteous little girls, so good. They expect to be so good. And you see a version of what you see at the beginning of the poem, the way in the beginning of the poem you're sort of narrowing down on a particular place. These are the poor, this exhibit, this human exhibit. But at the end, their humanity is given back to them through the instrument of the little girls, the righteous. Where did righteousness come from? And that quality that in an adult would be moralizing and sententious is in these little children. Heartbreaking. So good, they expect to be so good. And the reader, of course, knows that this is the argument against this place. This is why the place should rouse us to something beyond civic shock. It's that they will not be allowed to be good. And I would like to make the corollary point that those of you who watch on television The Wire, has anyone here watched The Wire? It's very great. And it does exactly this last line. It shows you over and over and over. The poem does it in almost no words at all. But it shows you the impossibility of rising out of certain circumstance. We have this, convenient American platitude of, oh, your birth does not freeze you. make you. You can change. You can through labor and diligence. But to some extent, that's foolishness.
I think. Would you agree that? I mean, I think you're reminding me of how politically or socially sort of aware he is. I mean, the two things, listening to and looking at the poem again and again, we see this spare, very complex thinking on a scene or or evoking something, but there always seems to be a strong social awareness, sort of and a moral, kind of a concern for our condition. Would you agree with that? I mean, are we going to? Without being didactic, I don't mean he has a political shtick. I think he views at times the lyrical and the political the same.
Well, that's what's so striking is that he's the most literary, sophisticated, demanding writer. I mean, for all that he uses very small words that quotations sometimes, but words you don't have to look up. The syntax is complex, and the movement through these lacunae is complicated. He's a hard poet, despite the simplicity of the word choice, and he's so much the opposite of the slovenly. There's I use the word precise. I mean, impeccable quality to these lines that when I think of political writing, it has in general a kind of strenuous, is sloppy, we don't have time to be perfect, as though that were part of the ambience of the writing.
But I think in all these poems, at least in one place, there's a take on social conditions, on poverty, and I don't mean it in that didactic, rhetorical way. I mean it in a genuinely, deeply felt kind of a way. Why don't we move on to a poem that I think also has a touch of politics in it too. So I'm going to read this one, okay? The next one we'll do is called Niece. Is there? Did you say that he's both precise and puzzling? Isn't that the case, or am I hearing that it's both very spare and clear and?
I didn't say that, but I said words to that effect because I think that he's demanding. He's
demanding, and again, listen to the way the mind wanders here from thing to thing without. It's done authentically, it's done beautifully, and not necessarily explained. It just works. The streets of San Francisco, she said of herself, were my father and mother, speaking to the quiet guests in the living room looking down the hills to the bay. And we imagined her walking in the wooden past of the western city. Her mother was not that city, but my elder sister. I remembered the watchman at the beach telling us the war had ended. That was the First World War, half a century ago. My sister had a ribbon in her hair. I'm wary of biographical things, and I'm very curious what you have to say, but I do want to mention that this was written in the 1960s, about the time of the death of Oppen's sister. I
hadn't known. Yeah. But you feel in the last stanza that kind of indelible, evanescent past, unforgettable. But what's interesting in the poem to me, among other things, is the use of the first person. What is the role of this I? The poem is intimate and direct. The niece at the party or social gathering says, "The streets of San Francisco were my mother and father," and the speaker is the person in whom that first person is the location in which everything convenes. He is both present on the occasion of this remark, and he's the one capable of correcting it. And this is a poem of, it seems to me, reprimand, among other things. But this I is he's the person who remembers the whole story of the real mother, not those streets, you fabricating bitch. My sister.
Is it a self-centered remark? Is he antagonistic towards the niece? Is it, in other words, she said, the streets were I learned it on the streets, or something, or is there some notion of her, of her criticizing her parents and then him ruminating on this?
I think that there's a kind of sternness in the manner in which he moves away from her remark. That there may be other readings, but that's what I hear. A correction, reprimand may be too strong, I don't know, but that's how I hear this. And then I remember. I'm the person in this room who can say with authority, though he doesn't say it, he only writes it. So there's a kind of atmosphere of tact and discretion in the poem. This is not a poem of making a scene at a party over a remark. This is a poem of rumination born out of a kind of fastidiousness. No, that is not true. Your mother was my sister. And then this memory that he's probably the only one in the room who knows of this event. And then you have a sense that when he disappears, when this first person disappears, that whole moment disappears, it vanishes, except insofar as the poem gives it a longer life. But what the poem is talking about is the fragility of that, I think, convening of the past and the present, and the chance remark, the associations that it prompts. That's what.
I would add to that, which I think is extremely helpful, and I mean, not helpful is an understatement, but I would see elements or suggestions of kind of a parallel between his disturbance over his niece and the way he moves into the personal memory of his sister. But I would also add that there are elements of class within this, or that he's playing with elements of class. The quiet guests in the living room, referring to his sister as an elder sister, had a ribbon in her hair, they're by a watchman. There's some. When I opened, I talked about his concern with the trappings of class and how throughout his life he tried to escape them or tried to make contact with other classes. He did this throughout his life and in many different ways. And I just see a sort of consciousness of class, and of also these references to the world, to the parallel between his personal grief over his sister and at least 2 world wars.
Yeah.
Can we ask questions?
Yes, please do. Yes, go right ahead.
And we imagined her walking in the wooden path of the Western City. Is that the mother?
No, it's the niece. It's the response to what she's just said. The streets of San Francisco were, she said of herself, were my father and mother. And the guests hearing this, the collective we, imagined her walking in the wooden path of the great city, the niece. Yeah, the woman who has just spoken.
Yeah. But interesting, what frames the poem, we're talking about him being the one who remembers and embodies all and looks back, but what frames the whole poem are 2 world wars,
Yeah.
So, yeah, but go, I'm sorry, you go ahead, yeah.
Something else really frames it. In the first line, the reference to the streets of San Francisco, there was, in the 60s, this supposed war going on between the World War II generation coming of age, the post-World War II generation coming of age, and that niece, whom he sort of quotes, is, especially after you both illuminated some of the biography, I have a feeling it could be even a funeral gathering or a memorial or something where the quiet guests are and the niece, the daughter of the departed, says, I remember these streets as my father and mother, which is kind of a hippie thing to say.
That would be, I think that's a kind of dangerous application of biography to text, because there's really nothing in the poem that tells you that. Moreover, it seems to me that for her to, had she done so, that would have been an outrageous thing to do at a funeral for your mother, to say she wasn't my mother.
But
things happen like that.
But no, I do agree.
Yes, I know, but I think that the poet's tone would have been different. I think that there's a kind of relaxation in those opening lines, or it seems to me.
But you used the word hippie, and I can't remember why now, but I agree with that. I think there's some. It is the 60s, and she was out on the streets, and maybe she went in that direction, and maybe that was. I think that's slightly in the poem, and I think that's important. At least that's my. I think that is there. I don't know why, but it's definitely suggested that she was living on the streets, maybe, as the way many of us or many people we knew were at that time, and it was a highly political era, and that might have been the route that she took, and hence was not a strong family or didn't have an attachment to her mother, clearly. So, yeah. No.
But there's something else in here, which is, we imagined her walking in the wooden path to the Western City. That's like San Francisco. Isn't that like San Francisco before the earthquake or something? Wasn't it rebuilt? The gold rush. I mean,
wooden, it certainly has that for me, and I'll let you answer that. But I would say the word wooden has lingered with me, and I raise this to you. He breaks through a wooden thing in this, and the poem becomes almost an elegy to his sister. Doesn't the word wooden stand there for something that he totally shifts away from? Or is that,
Could you paraphrase what you just said? I'm not quite following.
The word, she was talking about wooden paths being the really gold rush, the early San Francisco era. But on another level, I always had the thought in reading the poem that wooden, it was a sort of, the poem begins as sort of a non-feeling state, or a state of harshness towards his niece, and then turns into a very moving elegy towards his sister. And the word wooden, it's a kind of...
Frozen.
Frozen,
stiff.
yes. Yeah, cold. Yeah.
I mean, if you were to...
Non-feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I read it that way, too.
Yeah. On the left back there.
There's also a very interesting thing going on here with time, because even though it starts with she said of herself and we're in the past, there's something about the progressive that brings me into the present. And then, and there's a sense of all these times coming together. And it really stops with me when he says, I remembered
as instead of I remember, because I'm kind of expecting I remember now in the moment of writing, and yet he takes us back to another remembering. Anyway, I find that really interesting.
It is really interesting, and again, he's always dealing with the workings of the mind, and the mind has these weird, inexplicable shifts all over the place.
Though there is, she said of herself, and we imagined, I remembered. So you can, I mean, you're responding to a kind of ambience in the poem that I think, a strangeness in that I remembered moment.
So a simultaneity of all these different moments?
Yes.
Privileging of memory in which it all crumbles together.
Yeah.
We better move. One more quick question, and then, because we have 4 other poems to look at, but go ahead.
Piggybacking.
Go ahead, you can piggyback.
I think too, I mean, I think there is, the word privileging is great there, because it seems to me the beginning of the poem and the kind of distance you sense is, of course, I mean, I think, the poet's or the speaker characterizing the niece's speculation regarding her mother, the niece's version. Right. And so it's interesting because you can read, and we imagined her walking the wooden path to Western City 2 ways, as if maybe just for a nanosecond he's willing to entertain his niece's version of her mother. But then, as you said, wooden almost can be a wordplay, but it's frozen, as you said. And so then we go down from the mother being recalled as a mother, you know, someone who's socialized, was married, maybe a woman of privilege and status, to the little girl with the ribbon in her hair who was once vulnerable at the end of the war. And so suddenly the memory at the end is the memory of that frail, not frail, weak, but just vulnerable child. And of course, the niece can never really know her mother as a child. So I just see it as that class.
You said somewhere, cadence is everything. And a lot of these lines, if you don't hear them, I mean, I agree. I think that's very, helpful what you said. But I think the only way to decipher them sometimes is to hear the music in them, because they're very puzzling and very ambivalent or contradictory. So, okay, now. Who reads this one? I think. Should I read? Do you want to read it?
I'd rather. I will read it. If you
okay, thanks.
Which one?
Oh, sorry. Philai teku philai.
You do the Greek, though.
What?
You do the Greek. Because I don't have my...
I just did it. Philai teku philai.
No, in English, you do the...
We believe that means loved and not loved, or loved and hated. Philai teku philai.
What language?
It's Greek.
Greek.
Me.
And we believe it means something like loved and hated, or loved and not loved, which is repeated.
I did once know this, but knowledge has fled. Philai teku philai. There's a portrait by Eakins of the intellectual, a man who might be a school teacher, shown with the utmost seriousness, a masculine drama in the hardness of his black shoes, in the glitter of his eyeglasses and his firm stance. How we have altered. As Charles said, rowing on the lake in the woods, if this were the country, the nation, if these were the roots through it. How firm the man is in that picture, though pedagogic. This was his world. Grass grows to the water's edge in these woods. The brown earth shows through the thinned grass at the little landing places of vacation. Like deserted stations, small embarkation points, we are lost in the childish here, and we address only each other in the flat-bottomed lake boat of boards. It is a lake in a bend of the parkway. The breeze moves among the primitive toys of vacation, the circle of the visible. The animal looked across and saw my eyes. Vacation's interlude, when the animal ran. What entered the mind when dawn lit the iron locomotives, the iron bridges at the edge of the city, underpinnings, bare structure, the animal's bare eyes in the woods. The relation of the sun and the earth is not nothing, the sea in the morning, and the hills brightening, loved and not loved, the unbearable impact of conviction and the beds of the defeated, children waking in the beds of the defeated, as the day breaks on the million windows and the grimed sills of a ruined ethic. Bursting with ourselves, and the myths have been murderous, most murderous, stake and faggot. Where can it end? Loved, loved and hated, Rococo boulevards backed by the Roman, whose fluted pillars blossoming antique acanthus stand on other coasts, lifting their tremendous cornices. Hard poem to talk about. You feel it. You feel a sense of world, a sense of polarities, but to talk about it, perhaps.
Okay. Let me make one observation. Let's throw it open. Absolutely. Yeah. This is a much longer poem, maybe not successful every place, incredibly beautiful in other places. But when you compare it to Nice, there's a similar thing, which is the wandering of the mind, and it either works for you, it doesn't. I think it's brilliant because this, if you think about it, this is how many different strands of thought are taking place at the same time, and you can feel very differently about the same thing as you think about it. So. And to get back to your opening remark of there sort of always being a struggle within the mind for love or for hate. Do we love reality or do we hate it for its unfairness, for its shitty politics, for, it's weighing these things. But I'm sorry, yes, let's please. Did you have a question in the back there?
Like, why start with the portrait? Why does the portrait dominate these opening stanzas, this firm though pedagogic? Yeah.
It represents something that's certain.
Yeah. It's finished, it's realized, it's an artifact, it's an image. It's also the past, so it's, in both of those senses, I'm certain. I think that's exact. And what is in opposition to it? How is uncertainty located?
In us.
Yeah.
Or the animal.
What's the animal? There's the us in the conduit on the boat, moving, transient, and there's the unalterable portrait of. It's sort of doubly firm. The portrait's not going to change, and the figure himself is.
How would you characterize, Louise, the picture? How would you characterize his feeling towards this portrait?
I want to know what the animal is doing, but how would I characterize?
Because he says in the first stanza, how we have altered.
How have we altered?
How have we altered?
Which is interesting. Because both of you changed it to how.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
It says a lot about us, but not about the poem. It's the exclamation point that I think accounts for that inversion. How have we altered seems a kind of intensification. The exclamation seems how can this have happened? And so I think that there's a way in which that punctuation presses you toward an inversion within the sentence. And given the the kind of poet Oppen is, I assume all of this is to a purpose, though he can't have anticipated every wrong reading. How do I see the
pedagogic? The pedagogic. What is he?
Well,
he begins. They're on a boat together. They're bobbing around in the wind. And it begins on an association he's having while this has taken place. Something has made him think of this Eakins is it a portrait of I view it as somewhat, again, a kind of hard portrait, or of a conventionally masculine, or hence capitalistic. But I honestly don't know. That's why I'm
all those things I would say, but the intellectual in the second line, I mean, I think we can assume that these figures in their boat are also representations of the intellectual, and their fluidity and dispute opposed to the portrait's high polish and decisiveness. This is a man who, once he forms an opinion, is not likely to change his mind. But I think that the attitude toward this figure is not the sort of simple contemptuousness that you would suppose. I think that there's a kind of nostalgia, a kind of tenderness for this image, the idea of a world in which such firmness was possible, such confidence was possible, and a kind of regret, well, not a yearning to go back, but a kind of sorrow that no longer really exists.
And then you can contrast that next page with the children of the defeated. You know, I mean, the contrast between a period of time that there was stability and there were portraits being made of people of some consequence. I mean, a school teacher, and then you've got the terrible lines where it's children waking in the beds of the defeated, and then a ruined ethic. What is the ruined ethic? The ruined ethic is the tremendous poverty in the country, the shifting of the country, the changing from the sort of stability that there was in the 19th century. It's against the 20th. And the myths have been murderous, most murderous. Myths that if you're poor, you can become anything, which he says in one of the other books.
Yeah.
I don't think you can separate the man's political convictions, which were part of the man himself. They weren't political in that sense. They were part of his real feelings against a country or classes, of separate classes, where you could be of a middle class and get things and be comfortable, and address poverty. What that does to people.
I agree strongly, but you've excluded what I think important things lead up and reinforce within the poem lead up to that and reinforce what you're saying. You know, in the end, I think you're right that there is a tenderness and sympathy for the Eakins figure. I think that's very important. And then he's maybe saying that something has happened in the interim. What about, how would you characterize, I think there may be a little more contempt, and I don't mean to simplify it, but a little more contempt for the primitive toys of vacation, for the altering of the, because that's the next movement within the poem is to
I agree, and there's a kind of effortfulness in that, in all the accoutrements of vacation. Now we ceremoniously stage our vacation, and a kind of, it's as though the portrait represents the last outpost of something, some simplicity of mind, and this You're shaking your head.
I was responding.
Continue. This is.
Well, just that I agree with you that contempt here. Well, it's interesting because these primitive toys of vacation, you would assume, include the boat that they're on.
Right.
So he's talking also about the rituals in which he cooperates and their necessity, what are they seeking? Is this truly the only way that such interruption of labor is to be secured? I mean, unasked questions. The poem is not posing those particular questions, but there's an attitude of a kind of taint about the vacation, the ceremony of vacation, but it's what he seems to be doing himself.
And
I think.
Over here, yeah.
I think it has to do with our whole relation with nature, the natural world, how we've lost it. In the day of the storm, this was the nation and the country, and the lake was the route through it. And this, people lived on boats, and that was the substance of their life. And now it's become trivialized. It's like your toy for the weekend. Your real life is in the city or the locals, but something terrible has been lost.
Yeah, something happened. Something has happened.
Ground, we've lost our connection.
So the flight of the animal represents almost the natural world's protest.
When you spoke about it, it's a certain sympathy. I think I'm hearing the portrait and this privileged picture of this pair punting on a lake as Oppen's having a certain sympathy for himself and his place in this received wisdom, the Western culture that the portrait embodies. And yet he has this earnest, emotional response to the poor, to the children in the beds of the defeated, and trying to reconcile those in himself, I think, is that sense of sympathy that I hear in this too, that he's part of it. The cornice is this cultural heritage that we couldn't do without, and that he doesn't want to turn his back on, but yet what does it have to do with these?
The only word I would dispute in what you say is the word reconcile, because I think that it's this that makes Oppen so great. He wants the questions, the dilemma to grow more complex, the questions to multiply. I think a simpler, more sententious poet would seek to reconcile apparent opposites and would insistently do so. He may, I don't know I think that he wants to understand what's at issue. I think always the poems want to understand what's at issue, what's at stake, to see clearly, they move by a series of assertions and perceptions followed by and yet, on the other hand. And I think that never stops. The poems are open-ended. Now we begin the dancing portion of the evening.
He brilliantly captures, I don't know anybody else he so naturally captures our political is not the right, our awareness of our social condition. He's got an eye for how the world is altered, what man has done to it, how it pisses him off, it annoys him, how he looks for some pleasure with, it's a very real thing. This is how the mind works. This is what we do when we get out. Now the poem moves to seeing this animal's eyes amidst industrial or ugly, these ugly structures. Some of the other poems we look at are going to have, it seems, it's vacations interludes. It seems as if, is he making some real contact here, or is there some sort of almost transcendence in the awareness of this, of the reality of this animal amidst all of this phony, or this sort of all these structures, all these industrial structures, or
well,
what?
I'm not sure. I think that the poem in places is a little opaque, and it's, you tend to carry over ideas of the natural from other poems,
right,
and then let them inform this. I mean, the animal, there's nothing to be said against the animal. I mean, it seems to represent things that Oppen would praise: candor, directness, a kind of
he would praise the being aware of the animal. He would praise being conscious of it.
He would.
And trying to be more conscious of it.
Yeah. Fellow on
the boat.
Fellow
Charles,
on
you know
boat.
Charles.
Well,
There's a buddy.
there's an effect to that. Yeah.
It seems to me that there's relation to nature. There is a sense, though, of the inability. In the woods, there's a single quotation mark. The relation of the sun and the earth is not nothing. The sea in the morning, quotation mark, and the hills bright, loved and not loved. It seems to me that there's a whole question of problematical relationship to nature that's also brought up in the whole question of we're lost in the childish here on the lake in our vacation. Mm-hmm. So he's doing the absolute opposite of sentimentalizing it or romanticizing it, and he's really looking at the human inability to really completely, and where the animal's bare eyes are part of it. I mean, it's opaque finally to us. We love it and we don't love it, and it's other. I think there's just a strong sense of otherness there.
Well, look at the modifiers too. Little landing places, small embarkation points. Everything is miniaturized, as you say.
And how firm the man is in that picture. We are lost in childish, in the childish here.
Yeah.
It's just, and then it goes back at the end to the Roman with fluted pillars standing on other coasts lifting their tremendous cornices, which is another, in a way, incredibly strong, durable, vertical image like the man in the picture.
Like House of Mandates?
But what do they put on it? Blossoms.
Right after stinking faggot.
Blossom.
The blossom is part of the design, part of the, what is it, Corinthian.
I was struck by a kind of vertical and horizontal, kind of a very complex weave. And the idea that he's an artist and he's talking about creation of humans, whether it's the art of beacons and the painting, or what humans can do on one hand, whether it's the construction of the column with the horizontal cornice and the pushing up of some force, whether it's the process of age or the progress of age or generations or civilizations, and the idea of what I thought was a reference to the witches, burning witches at the stake, the sort of faggots at the bottom, the horizontal, and then the stake sort of almost in parallel to the Corinthian column. And then he talks so much about vision and eyes and the eyeglasses of the man, the human construction of the aid to vision. as contrasted with the naked eyes, the bare eyes of the animal, startling him in the middle of this childish vacation, an attempt to somehow be outside of time, outside of the circle of vision, the childish here as opposed to the vertical sort of history that were part of both good and bad, horrible, murderous, and wonderful, and the attempt by the Romans to take from the Greek and make copies and do better. So I just thought that there wasn't resolution, but there was a kind of sense of an enormous complexity. And humans are capable of so much, and that.
I don't know if, yes.
I also see something about the consequences of human arrogance. When we're bursting with ourselves, so that when the centrality of the human takes over everything in nature and allows this steaming beast of a locomotive to come and wind its horrible stuff all over our precious earth, we have a ruined ethic, which once perhaps existed in an earlier time, in the time of, I don't know whether it was the time of Agans or pre-Agans, but bursting with ourselves, there's a consequence that we pay for that.
Definitely, we've talked about his incredible political sensitivity in being inseparable from his eye and his lyrical rendering. Yes, sir.
I love how you don't know whose mind. He says what entered the mind.
Yeah.
Because
he does that all over the place, and we're going to find that in. That's what I was talking about with the boys' room. The pronouns are very confusing. Yes, but continue. Yeah.
Well, just because normally it would be a restoring thing to be in nature, let alone to be on a vacation. But it makes him feel so puny and wrong to be there. The boat is, he points to his artifice at every moment. It's not a pleasurable, secure thing. And the animal, he's not really seeing the animal so much as the animal is beholding him in a funny way. So that mind, what entered the mind, his mind, our minds, when we build those things, the animal's mind, when it sees all this technology pushed through into the natural world. And I think that the poem just continues to struggle with loved and hated. All the way through, all of it.
I think he struggled with it in his life and in many of these poems. I think that's how Louise Oppen sort of is. There's a
goodness or beauty in nature.
There's an unstated.
All the time.
But what makes him impossible to reduce into a political system always is this. The sense of the mystery of what's out there, the difficulty in realizing reality or in the existence of, this is repeated that his strongest moments, his most intense moments seems to be when he perceives another or a thing or something out there, and that's not a political concern at all. That's more of a philosophical and a poet's poetic.
I
I sort of find this, at the risk of failing the course.
It won't be the first time, Frank.
This happens with McAllister also. It's like a metaphysical poem to me, and it proceeds of these leitmotifs and conceits, and it proceeds of the movements. You have the historical, the natural, the urban, and then the mannerist almost to the end. And it's like a great chain of being that is established. The poem is in a way different, and more fulsome, and more kind of rounded than the other poems. And it runs contrary to the old essence in a way of Oppen's work, in some strange way, in its completeness and its definitiveness in a strange way. It's very readable. It has a narrative.
Do we know when this was written?
They're all written in the 60s, I think. They're all from one book called This in which she wrote. This in which. That's the title of the book.
This in which.
This in which.
That'll be in one of the poems, that line. This in which is the title of this book, all written in the 1960s. Maybe we should move on to
Just one last, and then we'll move on.
My recollection of Beacons is the portraits of these beautiful young men wading in a river or rowing in a river. And that's why I'm wondering whether there is actually a criticism of the intellectual, almost like, look what we have become, natural man, look what we have become. Because I can't put these two paintings together. And also I think the masculine drama is the drama of this ugly world we created, all the way from the Greeks.
Well, the myth of masculinity, the stereotype of masculinity.
Excuse me, I just
I think
respond. I think there is a very famous portraits by the scientific doctors sitting in an anteroom. I'm sure it's a very and I think this.
I don't know if this is
might be the specific.
I don't know if this is the one or not, but I'll pass this around. This is one.
Yeah, there are also a number of full-length single portraits of a single male of this type. I mean, there was a big Eakins retrospective fairly recently. There was a lot of that stuff. And the gravitas is exactly there.
Moving right along.
Just any thought on the Greek title? Why in Greek did he do this a lot?
He has a wide range of knowledge, and the poems are filled with quotation from Greek literature, from much Latin, quotes from Virgil.
But doesn't it also relate to this 19th century pedagogue and the image of the column at the end?
It goes to the column.
One more question. I'm sorry, one more. Yeah.
I just wonder if you can comment. It seems to me like the end part of this is like the world totally falling apart. And I was curious about the structure of it, where it goes from a lot of density in its stanzas, and then all of a sudden it's just very two-line rods, a whole series of them, and I feel like the world is kind of coming apart when he's done. It's really romantic kind of structure.
Well, the second page changes these little short two-line stanzas.
Well, it seems to me to be moving into a kind of lyric rapture, a kind of associative lyric. Meditation, but the form is the lyric form overtakes the more what would be a word? What would be a word for those longer stanzas? Rhetorical movements of the beginning.
Okay. The next poem will be Psalm.
Well, okay.
We have 3 short poems, or two short poems, right? No, 3.
We may not get to all 3 if you want me to do something also.
Well, we can. How about we do Psalm and then Performance of Love?
I'd rather do Boys' Room. Could we do Boys' Room? Let's each of us choose. That's what I would choose.
Why don't we... I tell you what. Let's read... let's get as far as we get. Let's go to Psalm and get as far as Psalm. Veritas sequitur. In the small beauty of the forest, the wild deer bedding down, that they are there. Their eyes effortless, the soft lips nuzzle, and the alien small teeth tear at the grass. The roots of it dangle from their mouths, scattering earth in the strange woods, they who are there. Their paths nibbled through the fields, the leaves that shade them hang in the distances of sun. The small nouns crying faith in this in which the wild deer startle and stare out.
Well, it's a poem about, it seems to me, about it enacts mystery and wonder. It conflates them. And then somehow moves from the natural to the the tiniest building block of language, the small nouns. Well, it's not the tiniest, but it's sort of where do you put your belief? To what do you cling? And in this in which the wild deer startle and stare out. It's a very different stare from the stare in the last poem. The deer are the representatives of this world, and the roots. The alien small, everything is small. Small beauty, small teeth, small nouns. It's a word he uses a great deal, in fact, but it doesn't insult the word, it modifies. It seems to go to affirm the seeable, the known, the ungrandiose, the small nouns crying faith. It's as though the language itself were saying, take heart in the mouths of the deer, hang in there. This is not a poem I know how to do much with. It seems to me an exquisite thing, but not
I think that the small,
resistant to my particular capacities.
The small nouns, is he talking about the poem? It's sort of the poem. It's called Psalm, And is the poem itself, in a way, it's the most intense or the most spiritual or the deepest realization of the small beauties that he
Well, I don't know that he would say the most, but it is an artifact that seeks to align itself with. It is a made thing that seeks to resemble the forms of nature, as though it were somehow always here.
Well, we could.
It's fun to think that the word "song" has the word "small" in it.
It's missing an L.
What was his religious background?
I don't think he was born Jewish, but I don't think he was religious at all. I don't think.
Well, that's typically Jewish.
He was very Jewish.
What is that phrase? Is that veritas? What does that mean?
We think that it means
Water?
truth follows or
It's not an infinitive. That's right.
It's part of a quote from St. Thomas Aquinas.
Is it?
Yeah, the whole thing is veritas sequitur esse rei.
What does it mean?
Truth follows from the existence.
From the existence of things, and that is always not always here. It is in realizing the reality of this tender and living thing that something good happens, whether it's truth or truth follows upon the existence of things. Yeah.
Are any of the editions annotated?
The new one is extensive.
Which the selected?
New collected. That's all where the portrait is and what the Latin means and what the Greek means and where it came from.
Good. I had to look it all up. Yeah.
I think a reading of this is about experience and the distance between describing, and language. So maybe it's ars poetica. That you have this beginning, all this praise and this just simple, the thingness, all these things that are in the world, and all we can do is have small nouns that cry faith, have faith in this. And it's sad in a way, but the best we can do. I mean, that's what I hear him saying. That's the best we can do. So,
well, it's quite a bit if you think about it, to cherish life or to make oneself conscious of the existence of something else. It's a very good thing to do.
I don't think he's saying that's the best we can do with a kind of resigned hopelessness. I think he's saying this is an immensity. It's an immensity. It is the thing to be sought. It is the thing to be desired. It is the thing to be faithful to, this impulse, this. So I think that there's a sense of high purpose, high moral and aesthetic purpose attached to this narrowing of the gaze. This.
Right. Almost a hymn or praise.
Yeah.
It looks like a picture of awe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We've all had it. We go out into.
Seeing in the deer is thrilling.
There's also a great sense of otherness, again. There's just the tremendous otherness of nature, the alien small teeth. And that's where I get the kind of faith in this, in which the wild deer startle and stare out. I mean, they're just so other that it's the only reaction.
In the back, and then we move on. Yeah, go ahead.
I just think it's interesting, just three things. Interesting first that at the beginning, at the start of the poem, for what it's worth, it's sort of abstracted a bit, the wild deer bedding down, that they are there, sort of a report, news of the deer in the forest. But by the end, it seems to get more and more specific until we're on the path. And not only do we see the deer, but the deer looks back. you know that incredible moment when maybe an animal looks back at you and you make eye contact for a split second before they run. But it seems kind of amazing, that tentative moment at the end, which might be, kind of almost divine. But the other thing was just that starting with Veritas Secretary, it seems to echo what he did in the poem before, because there's this certain juxtaposition and contrast between kind of the planks of rational thought, neoclassical education, and these wild moments.
Well, there's two different concerns that are going on. Okay, boys' room. And I do wonder, what I'm going to do, we're going to end, we're not end, I'm going to read The Forms of Love, which is a wonderful love poem. And then we're going to move on, because Louise has a wonderful poem of her own, which she's going to read. Okay.
And we don't even know what it is, but it's bound to be wonderful.
Well, do you want to pick one that isn't so wonderful?
Boys' Room.
Yeah,
Boys' Room. We're going to talk about this one a little bit and then read Forms of Love.
We have to end on a love poem. And
then that will allow the idea. Well, I'm happy to just go on whatever you say.
Well, why?
Whatever we had said that I would read a poem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Boys' Room. A friend saw the rooms of Keats and Shelley at the lake and saw they were just boys' rooms and was moved by that. And indeed, a poet's room is a boy's room, and I suppose that women know it. Perhaps the unbeautiful banker is exciting to a woman, a man, not a boy gasping for breath over a girl's body. This poem is so amazing, I hardly know where to begin. I mean, it begins in a kind of leisured way, with that same sense of internal dialogue. Very simple first stanza. A friend saw these rooms of the famous poets, dead early, Keats dead, and this is crucial. One drowned, gasping, and one TB, gasping. So the gasping for breath that in the last line has manifold readings. It's the poet's kind of habit of awe, the poet's habit of turning the immediate occasion into a kind of occasion for art, removing himself, making of the beloved a muse. So it's that kind of gasping for breath. And it's also the boy dying. But gasping for breath, that these poets who do anything for language, and the women who are perhaps, the poem says, impatient with this. One could understand if they were. And I think that one of the things that you see over and over in Oppen's work is this breadth of sympathy, so that the figures that seem set up as a sort of bad guys, they turn out to be human, sympathetic, understandable. Oppen's wish isn't to make a system of oppositions that are arranged hierarchically. He doesn't want to be the big guy on the top. The poems aren't written to that ambition. So a friend saw the rooms of Keats and Shelley at the lake and saw they were just boys' rooms and was moved by that. And indeed, that sense of language that you had in Street, corroboration. Yes, we can say this is so. And indeed, a poet's room is a boy's room. Something frozen, something immature, something self-absorbed. In the cases of the poets named, they never got beyond boyhood. So in the most literal sense, indeed in every sense, these rooms are boys' rooms. And I suppose that women know it. Women have this second sense. Women have this... They get the aroma of the self-intoxicated boy and would choose perhaps over this romantic figure the unbeautiful banker, perhaps the unbeautiful banker. And the poet here removes himself. He perhaps this is what women need. But it's not a kind of fools. It's one could understand were it so. Perhaps even this furthest remove from erotic intoxication, the unbeautiful banker, is to be preferred. But there are so many counterweights. The stolidity of that banker figure is like the opposite of exciting. But then too, you think of people like Stevens, who was in his own way an unbeautiful insurance mogul. But I don't think that the poet is doing anything like that. He's saying, go as far from this as you can, and you can see where the poet's removal, his sense always of where the next poem's coming from. And here I hear the kind of thing that I heard around the word vacation in the poem that we read. He's talking about himself, and he's cautioning himself against, I think, tendencies of his own that take him away from human life at the level that the deer would have us live. Something like that. But this is just the beginning of what can be said about this poem.
Could I just ask how you would read in that last stanza? Is exciting to a woman, the man, the end of that line. How do you wrap that into the next? I'd just be curious because I sort of get stuck.
Perhaps perhaps the unbeautiful banker is exciting to a woman, and then who is he? A man. The unbeautiful banker, a man, not a boy. Not a boy gasping for breath over a girl, not a boy removed by awe from the occasion of the body. The stolid, unbeautiful banker, he's a man. The poet is the boy. And Keats and Shelley were only boys. So he's playing with facts here, never charming them out of their actuality, but he's saying what are the opposites of a boy, a man? What would represent a man? What's the least romantic version of a man? The banker. And yet perhaps to a woman preferable because less remote. And these poets are also, they're remote because they look marked by death.
There's an echo of the Philatec coup there too. How firm the man is in that picture.
Yeah.
You're lost in the childish here.
Yeah.
When you said counterweights, perfect, because part of the problem I had reading those last few lines are that when I read it the first time, I thought he was moving the unbeautiful banker, a boy, rather a man, not a boy, back into the boy's position, saying even that unbeautiful banker can be gasping for breath over a girl's body, because he doesn't punctuate. It's not a man, not a boy, who would be gasping.
We talked about grammar on the way up,
Yeah.
and you hear that too. I think her reading is right, but I think it's ambiguous.
It is, yeah.
It opens with a problem.
Right, which is so astounding, because you can't get, as you said, you don't know where to begin. And also, the Keats and Shelley, well, I didn't think about that till we paused it, and I suppose that women know it. You know, there was a very specific woman left by Shelley's drowning, gasping for breath, and I guess Keats, I don't know whether Keats left a woman or he was left one, but you know.
Didn't have the chance.
Right. But that's in there, that.
But death, of course, always leaves someone. And in that sense, Keats left Fanny, his wife. I'm sorry, I don't know if that was what you were talking about.
No, I thought it said something also about the poet always is something of the boy, retains the creativity, the fluidity of youth, and that the banker is stolid, has lost the creativity. But with that creativity comes kind of the immaturity, the impetuousness, the foolishness, the vulnerability of youth as well.
And self-absorption.
I don't know if to make this, but I think it's also worth knowing that when the woman gets with the banker, then she becomes a girl. So there's that other element. She becomes what? You know what I'm saying? The boy becomes a man when it's the banker. But then the woman becomes a girl when she gets under it.
No. She becomes
I had a much more romantic or whatever reading of it, where it's the man gasping for breath over the girl's body, and the
banker or the boy?
The banker. And it is his moment of poetry.
I think these boys were, Keats and Shelley they were boys, and they gasped, literally. They died of gasping. And so the poem starts with them, I think, in the emphasis. And not a boy gasping, it's one line, not a boy gasping. So that you can't take gasping away from boy. And it seems to me that that's in opposition to the banker.
One or two more questions, and then go back to it.
I just wanted to say that a central mystery here, which we wouldn't have in a romance language, is whether the friend is a man or a woman.
I always assumed the friend.
But we don't know.
Because I suppose that women know it. Kind of, to me, echoed.
Goes back to the friend.
Goes back to a friend, and that he opens that she's a friend. To me, kind of suggested that that's part of his own sensibility, that he doesn't label her or see her as female, male, but just that he has a more sophisticated or a more mature, whatever. You know.
So you're saying that you think it's a woman?
I assumed, I could be wrong, I assumed that it was the woman, when he says, and women knew it was a woman friend who made this observation, and she was very moved to see that. I would read the Forms of Love, because I know, unless you, I'd like to say a couple of words, and then you can read your poem. Is that all right? Okay.
Sure.
The only thing I'd say about we really don't have time, and I want her to read her poem, and I'm sure you do too. The Forms of Love is the one we won't get to, but it has, as I tried to say in the opening, some autobiography. When you read it on your own, it's one of his rare and I think completely wonderful love poems, and it's a poem of an early love, and if you're so inclined, it has a biographical. This was a key moment when he met his wife, and they did get expelled from school, and they were out all night. And I believe I've read that this is a poem about that experience. But it's also it's a poem of kind of forbidden love. Where they're parked out in the car. They shouldn't be out in the field. They shouldn't be out all night. What's going on? But it's a poem filled with, I think, sexuality and sexual love, and it's. I love the poem, and it's a gorgeous poem, and I urge you to read it. Okay.
All right.
So which one have you read?
I'll read a poem from this book, Averno. It's in 6 sections. Do I have time for 6 sections? Yes. It's called October. And I think you'll hear in the 5th section how deep and above been on me. 1. Is it winter again? Is it cold again? Didn't Frank just slip on the ice? Didn't he heal? Weren't the spring seeds planted? Didn't the night end? Didn't the melting ice flood the narrow gutters? Wasn't my body rescued? Wasn't it safe? Didn't the scar form invisible above the injury? Terror and cold, didn't they just end? Wasn't the back garden harrowed and planted? I remember how the earth felt, red and dense. In stiff rows weren't the seeds planted? Didn't vines climb the south wall? I can't hear your voice for the wind's cries, whistling over the bare ground. I no longer care what sound it makes. When was I silenced? When did it first seem pointless to describe that sound? What it sounds like can't change what it is. Didn't the night end? Wasn't the earth safe when it was planted? Didn't we plant the seeds? Weren't we necessary to the earth? The vines, were they harvested? 2. Summer after summer has ended, bomb after violence. It does me no good to be good to me now. Violence has changed me. Daybreak. The low hills shine ochre and fire. Even the fields shine. I know what I see. Sun that could be the August sun returning. Everything that was taken away. You hear this voice? This is my mind's voice. You can't touch my body now. It has changed once. It has hardened. Don't ask it to respond again. A day like a day in summer, exceptionally still. The long shadows of the maples nearly mauve on the gravel paths, and in the evening, warmth. Night like a night in summer. It does me no good. Violence has changed me. My body has grown cold like the stripped fields. Now there is only my mind, cautious and wary with the sense it is being tested. Once more the sun rises as it rose in summer. Bounty, bomb after violence, bomb after the leaves have changed, after the fields have been harvested and turned. Tell me this is the future, I won't believe you. Tell me I'm living, I won't believe you. 3. Snow had fallen. I remember music from an open window. Come to me, said the world. This is not to say it spoke in exact sentences, but that I perceived beauty in this manner. Sunrise, a film of moisture on each living thing. Pools of cold light formed in the gutters. I stood at the doorway, ridiculous as it now seems. What others found in art, I found in nature. What others found in human love, I found in nature. Very simple, but there was no voice there. Winter was over. In the thawed dirt, bits of green were showing. Come to me, said the world. I was standing in my wool coat at a kind of bright portal. I can finally say, long ago, it gives me considerable pleasure. Beauty the healer, the teacher. Death cannot harm me more than you have harmed me, my beloved life. 4. The light has changed. Middle C is tuned darker now, and the songs of morning sound over-rehearsed. This is the light of autumn, not the light of spring. The light of autumn, you will not be spared. The songs have changed. The unspeakable has entered them. This is the light of autumn, not the light that says, I am reborn. Not the spring dawn. I strained, I suffered, I was delivered. This is the present, an allegory of waste. So much still you are fortunate. The ideal burns in you like a fever, or not like a fever, like a second heart. The songs have changed, but really they are still quite beautiful. They have been concentrated in a smaller space, the space of the mind. They are dark now, with desolation and anguish. And yet the notes recur. They hover oddly in anticipation of silence. The ear gets used to them. The eye gets used to disappearances. You will not be spared, nor will what you love be spared. A wind has come and gone, taking apart the mind. It has left in its wake a strange lucidity. How privileged you are to be still passionately clinging to what you love. The forfeit of hope has not destroyed you. Maestoso, doloroso. This is the light of autumn. It has turned on us. Surely it is a privilege to approach the end, still believing in something. 5. It is true there is not enough beauty in the world. It is also true that I am not competent to restore it. Neither is there candor, and here I may be of some use. I am at work, though I am silent. The bland misery of the world bounds us on either side, an alley lined with trees. We are companions here, not speaking, each with his own thoughts. Behind the trees, iron gates of the private houses, the shuttered rooms somehow deserted, abandoned, as though it were the artist's duty to create hope. But out of what? What? The word itself false, a device to refute perception. At the intersection, ornamental lights of the season. I was young here, riding the subway with my small book as though to defend myself against this same world. You are not alone, the poem said, in the dark tunnel. 6. The brightness of the day becomes the brightness of the night. The fire becomes the mirror. My friend, the earth is bitter. I think sunlight has failed her. Bitter or weary, it is hard to say. Between herself and the sun, something has ended. She wants now to be left alone. I think we must give up, turning to her for affirmation. Above the fields, above the roofs of the village houses, the brilliance that made all life possible becomes the cold stars. Lie still and watch. They give nothing, but ask nothing. From within the earth's bitter disgrace, coldness and barrenness, my friend the moon rises. She is beautiful tonight, but when is she not beautiful? Thank you.